can't say tomorrow day.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for continuing to take part with us in the Global Sports Summit. This is our last piece of content. And then just, I'll make a reminder here afterward of our speakers, but just to let you know, there will be a cool deal for a whole human performance evaluation at the Baylor Scott & White Sports Performance Center. So if the Cowboys headquarters right there, it's on the other side. There will be someone here who will be our Pied Piper to guide you over there, or at least give you the instructions for entry points. But it's a very cool facility, and their Gatorade Sports Science Institute is headquartered there, as well as Fusionetics and a few other just very smart doctors with player evaluation, injury prevention, stuff like that. So they'll actually run you through an evaluation. So if you got a bad shoulder, bad knee, or otherwise, it's a free doctor. But for now, to close out our session, we're going to have a very, very great conversation on leadership and culture and one team. But in advance of that, our philanthropic partner for this year's event was Elite Meet. I've had a working relationship with the Navy SEAL community for about 5-6 years now, working predominantly with the Navy SEALs parachute team, the Leapfrogs, getting them in to jump at bigger events than just a Navy week in, Cheyenne, Wyoming, trying to get them to do stuff, whether that's at Arrowhead Stadium or at MetLife Stadium for some NFL games. So from that relationship, Ian Chinelli, who's in here, he's the Greek god Adonis somewhere in the back. But he introduced me to John Allen, who's the CEO of Elite Meet, and and he'll explain it, but just from my perspective and how you guys can get involved to make the plug in case he doesn't do it, they're trying to take the 1% of special warfare operators and get them into transition for employment, much like you all are looking to do for your athletes, the ways in which Gary Payton was talking about earlier, right? To go from GP to Gary Payton, they're doing the same thing with special ops, and I think there's a lot of great things to really unify and pull together. They host events around the country, so if you have a cool facility or a cool idea or cool opportunities around what you do in your industry, please continue to talk and get to know John a little bit better before everyone departs here. But with that, John Allen, CEO, Elite Meet. Please give him a hand.
So April 19th, 2014, my entire life changed. I was a brand new Navy SEAL. I was deployed to Afghanistan. It was the tail end of our first deployment, which had been kinetic, meaning we actually went out and did operations for the majority of the deployment. And at the tail end of this deployment, we're in an alleyway in a town called Zarganshar, which is a very urban Afghanistan town. And our platoon was ambushed. And I was actually standing in an alleyway, where I'm under night vision, and I'm standing next to this wall, and a grenade came over the wall, actually hit my shoulder, and landed next to me before it detonated. If it wasn't for my medic, who saw me on the ground, applied tourniquets, there's no doubt that I would have passed away 5 years ago. And so the reason I tell this is not just to have a war story be thrown out to grab your attention, but when I came back from that deployment, I was medevaced out. I pushed to get into the next deployment as fast as I could. I didn't want my career to end because the injuries I sustained, even though I kept my limbs, they were significant enough that right then and there my career could have ended. And so I basically pushed to get into the next rotation, get into the next platoon. I blew off a lot of rehab. I would say don't do that if you have an injury. Don't blow off rehab. But ultimately, my injuries kind of came to a head after my second rotation, and my career fairly abruptly came to an end. When I joined the SEAL teams, I had every intention of doing 20 years. That was my plan. You go through years of training to get to the point where you're wearing a trident on your chest. The last thing you're going to do is say, and now I'm done a few years later. Because my career ended fairly suddenly, because the injuries kind of came up and it ended my career, I was thrust into a situation where I needed to make a transition to the civilian world, something I was fairly resistant to, as quickly as I possibly could. And the reality was, something that I hadn't been thinking about is the identity crisis that ensues when you leave behind something like the Navy SEAL teams, an elite team. I identified as a Navy SEAL. That's what I was. And the idea of getting a job was relatively simple, but navigating joining society all over again was something that was well beyond something that I could comprehend. And guess what? There's not many people you can go talk to about how to handle this transition. And so I wasn't really thinking that far out. I was really thinking logistically in terms of getting a job. I connected with an investment banker in New York who had a big network in New York, and he said, hey, if you're looking for a job, a great way to get a job is to meet people that do jobs that you might want to do. Make an impression on them, maybe they'll come hire you. And so I thought, what a great idea. I'll round up some folks from the SEAL teams that are going to be getting out of the teams relatively soon, and I'll have them come with me to New York. We'll have a networking event, and hopefully some people get some jobs out of it. And so I put all this effort into putting this event together in Times Square. We raised some money for it from the Navy SEAL Foundation. We have this amazing event in New York, and I'm like, this is it, I'm gonna get a job, and I've helped all my buddies. But ironically, I was like the one guy that nobody approached about getting a job because the assumption was my job was running these networking events. And so it prompted me to think that there's something there to kind of host these events for special operations folks getting out. And so what started as, let's host events where we can connect these transitioning special operators with great employment opportunities has since turned into a thriving community of about 700 operators that are all really struggling with the identity crisis that ensues when you leave behind an elite team, which is honestly a huge problem within our community. And our connection really to this audience is, so we put a lot of content out on social media about, frankly, the transition process for veterans, and it caught the attention of the New England Patriots. Some of their players were dealing with similar issues transitioning out of the NFL. There's a parallel there of identifying as an NFL player and then leaving that all behind. And so we actually went in and we spoke with the Patriots organization, some of their players. We're developing some curriculum for them right now to kind of help them walk through this loss of identity that occurs when you leave behind an elite team. So before I introduce the speakers, I do want to just say to Ian Gaffney and to the Global Sports Summit, thank you very much for having us. I mean, to be the philanthropic partner of this caliber of an event has honestly been mind-blowing. I've never been around one owner of a professional sports team, let alone pretty much everyone that exists. So this has really been an incredible opportunity. And so I'd like to introduce our panel. First, I'm going to introduce our moderator, which is Ms. Sanyan Shang, who is a CEO coach, advisor to Google Ventures, and the executive director of Duke University's Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at its Fuqua School of Business. She's the faculty of the Duke Story Lab. She's an author, and she also casually has over 1 million followers on LinkedIn, which if you're on LinkedIn, that's one of the hardest places to generate a huge following. She's got a massive following on LinkedIn, so she's kind of a god on LinkedIn. So welcome to the stage, Sanyan Shang. Joining Sanyan on stage is 4-star General Robert Brown, who assumed command of the United States Army's largest service component command, the U.S. Army Pacific, in May 4th, 2016. General Brown has previously commanded the U.S. Army Combined Arms Center, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington, and the Maneuver Center of Excellence, Fort Benning, Georgia. General Brown was commissioned a second lieutenant of infantry from the United States Military Academy in May 1981 and has served in many leadership and staff positions at every level of the Army and Joint Staff. He's deployed all over the place. He holds a Bachelor's of Science from the United States Military Academy, Master of Education from the University of Virginia, and a Master of Science in National Security and Strategic Studies, distinguished graduate from the National Defense University. Basically, being in the Navy, granted, I'm not from his side of the house, but this is like a living legend within the military. There's just not that many people that put on that uniform. In fact, there's 12, and he's one of them. So you're sitting, this is truly an esteemed audience. It's amazing to have you guys up here. Really excited for the panel discussion here on leadership, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much to Global Sports Summit as well.
Thank you, John, for that kind and generous introduction. So a theme that we've heard over these last 2 days is how technology is really disrupting even industries that we thought were previously immune to disruption, like sports. And how do we address that disruption? In my last 16 years of engaging with our military, a key takeaway is it's not enough just to address disruption. You have to stay ahead of it, you have to leverage it. And key to being able to do that is doubling down on the most powerful assets in our organization, which is our people. And so over the course of the next 40 minutes, that's what we'll be drawing out is leadership lessons from military on innovation, on resilience through the human dimension. Now, it's my privilege and honor to know General Bob Brown over, oh gosh, we go back 10 years?
10 years. Yeah.
10 years. And learning from him and seeing how he innovates. But first, before we go there, just to provide some context, in our US military, Army, there's only 12 four-star generals right now in active duty, and he is one of them. And in our nation's history, there's only 225 four-star generals, with George Washington being the first one. You're number 216, I think. So this is just to provide context. And to become a four-star general, you have to have accomplishments, but you also need to be able to get buy-in from a 360 degree from those whom you're reporting to throughout your years, from your peers, and also those whom you lead. And Bob is one of the most innovative leaders we have in our military today. So, but before we go there, let's start with your origin story a little bit. So you're also on the first team that Coach Mike Krzyzewski ever coached at West Point.
Yeah, so I can blame him. I was, it's interesting how people come in the military. And by the way, I'm really honored, but I'm pretty sure they got the wrong Brown when they selected me. Common name, so pretty soon the government will sort it out, and they'll tell me, hey, you were supposed to retire as a major or something, but I am really humbled. And there is one five-star general right now. You've seen him on TV with Shaquille O'Neal, the General Insurance. He's got a mustache, cartoon character. So it gives us something to strive for, that one five-star. But no, seriously, so I was in Michigan my last few years, as Ross there, a fellow Michigander, and a couple others I've met here. My last 3 years of high school, and a guy named Irvin Magic Johnson was a senior the same year I was, and he was going to Michigan State, so I was not going to Michigan State because I didn't want to sit the bench. But you know how your parents are. My father was complaining a lot that he was getting a lot of publicity, and I said, Dad, he's pretty good. All right, and for many years I used to kid my dad about that. But I was headed to Michigan, University of Michigan, on a basketball scholarship. Had no idea about the military at all. And a guy named Coach Krzyzewski, Coach K, came to my house, my last recruiting visit, to go visit West Point, which I didn't even know what it was. And I really fell in love with this sense of service to something greater than yourself. And quite honestly, Coach K, having gone to West Point, was very passionate about leadership. And so I came back and told the Michigan coaching staff, no, I'm headed to West Point. And this was 1977, so they thought I was a little crazy. They were talking about you're going to be in the Army for about 5 years. And I was, really just struck by that sense of service. And I was going to get out and probably become a coach. And I've talked to many coaches here, and coaching's a tremendous profession, a tough profession. But ended up loving the people in the military. Just tremendous people again. And it's been fascinating here. I want to make sure, before I forget, to thank the owners, all the folks involved in sports for what they do for our military. I was telling Clark Hunt, I was stationed at Leavenworth before this, Fort in Kansas, and the military appreciation, and in his case, the Kansas City Chiefs did, but for all the organizations, it makes a huge difference. And when we bring the young soldiers, the wounded warriors, the families, and it really, for them, it shows that people really care, and it's really special. It makes a huge, huge difference. And then I like to think in the partnership, the teams learn as well, and we learn. So it's one of the main reasons I'm here, just to thank folks for that support to the military. And then it's been fascinating. Leadership is leadership, whether it's in business, in sports, or in military. The problems Michael was talking about last brief, the exact same problems we're dealing with, this ambiguity and chaos in this fast-paced world. So absolutely fascinating. So that's kind of why I'm here, how I ended up in the military. It was 42 years ago. Coach K talked me into it, and it's been an honor to serve since.
Well, and we're so lucky, all of us, that you was able to do so. So when we think about innovation, you are known as one of the best innovators in our military today. And innovation in an established 300-plus-year-old, almost nearly 300-year-old organization, you're dealing with habits and bureaucracy. And to innovate takes courage. So can you talk us through how do you build this culture of courage?
Yeah, well, all the speakers have touched on, innovation is hard in any, it's hard in the military, it's hard in any field though, because, it's something new, and the bureaucracy is designed to say no, designed to keep folks in line. And then, a lot of the discussion, you're not just, innovation is changing a culture, which is very tough. The old culture eats strategy for lunch anytime. So I think one of the key things across the board in innovating is within your team, you've got to build a trust. And trust is so important. And yes, there are big events where you build trust, but it's really hundreds of small events. And when you see a great team, whether it's a sports team, business team, military team, it's trust that is built in hundreds of small events, working on it every single day. And the tough part of trust, it takes a long time to build it, and even longer, as we've been talking with the newer generations. I would say anybody under 30 to me is a newer generation. It used to be when you're in a position of authority of any type, a coach, again, a business leader, you automatically got respect until you kind of lost it. You got that trust until you lost it. It's not that way anymore. They question everything. It doesn't matter who you are. I know many people say, oh, you're a general, just tell them what to do. It's much, much different than that. You have to earn trust. And so in that team you're forming to innovate, there has to be an incredible trust that's built, you work on consistently, constantly. And the tough part of trust is you can lose it in a second. And it's usually little decisions. Again, not a big, huge event. It's little decisions. And so it's why it's so important in building trust. There's one thing, I don't care what field you're in, folks can tell, whether it's a team of 10 or a team of 100,000 like I have now, from the time we're born, we're evaluating those that lead us, our parents, coaches, teachers. And folks can tell instantly if someone truly cares about them or they're trying to make themselves look good and is, in essence, using you. And it's something we learn, and we're very, very good at it. So that genuine care is absolutely essential, and that's, again, built through trust. And if someone knows, that you don't, and if you think about the best leader you ever had, just think about, look back, it's probably not the smartest, probably not the most, the wealthiest, most influential, whatever. It's the one that you knew genuinely cared about you. So how are you building that in your organization? You've got to work it every single day in every small event. It's absolutely critical. And then you can start to create a learning environment where you can innovate.
So that trust actually leads to agility, and it's, as you're saying, it's the result of these small moments. Well, how do you do that? How do you do it? What does it mean to demonstrate trust? Because you can be the most caring person in the world, but if your followers don't see it, it really doesn't matter, right? So can you give us a specific example?
Yeah, I think one example, I think it takes a more confident leader to stand in front of a group of any size today and say, hey, I don't have all the answers. We need everybody in the organization. And often what we find is those closest to the problem, the cutting edge, they have the best answers. But is your organization such that they can trust and they will bring that forward and not feel intimidated? And you want to talk about intimidated, when you're in the military and there's this hierarchy, it's something we deal with all the time, is as you show that you care, you're building that trust in little events, and you've got to do it before the crisis is another thing. You don't want to wait for a crisis to build relationship. You want to build those relationships well before a crisis. Yes, a crisis can strengthen relationships that exist, but I see a lot of organizations, military, business, sports, they wait for something really bad, some crisis before they really start to look at how they build that trust. That's too late. You can recover from it, but it's very difficult. So you're building those relationships, and when I say you're showing that you care, a lot of times people will think, oh, well, you're being easy on people or something, and that's absolutely not right. And you show, for example, for us, the soldiers I have that I lead, I'm responsible. If God forbid we have something happen from a disaster, we have to go help. To North Korea starts firing missiles. I mean, those all the soldiers I lead will be there, are already in Korea, or will be there right away. So the best thing I can do to show I care is tough, demanding, realistic training that will save their lives if they have to do that. So it's a toughness, and they know you care. So it's not, but then, someone has a tragedy, they lose a parent or something, you're showing you care in other ways and genuinely care. So it's building that in small moments, thinking about it, including it. And what I find is also the higher up you go in an organization, we tend to be pretty good at small level, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 people. You get above that, and we tend to just automatically think the trust is being built, or we don't need the trust the higher up you go. And I would say it's even more important to take advantage of every opportunity. A simple meeting is a chance to build trust. A gathering, whenever you pull people together, you're building trust. And it can be events, it can be a sports competition doing, it can be some of the crazy icebreakers that people have. And then there's also a buy-in in that, again, where you're letting them know. It takes, again, a much more confident leader to say, I don't have all the answers, rather than just shut up and do as I say, which doesn't work anymore. We gave you a handout, a couple of cards, and it's interesting, on one of them is George Patton. And I would tell you that, unfortunately, like Patton wouldn't make it in today's world. He's an incredible leader during his time. I mean, but today, that method, it may work for a little while, a method, fear and so forth for a little bit, but it's never going to build the type team you need in today's ambiguous and chaotic world that is moving at incredibly. The velocity of human interaction is at a pace never before seen. So, it's building those teams, and it's much more than the, just do as I say. It's the confidence to say we don't have all the answers, and we need everybody's input. It's key.
So that's something that, in observing the U.S. military, that's a radical change, right? It went from the Patton days of command and control, and everything is prescriptive, to now a completely different culture change, where it's about, based on, we don't have all the answers, but collectively we do. Can you talk about that shift?
Yeah, you're talking about empowerment, and we talk a lot about this, and you're absolutely right. We've always had leaders that have empowered. There's famous leaders from Eisenhower, Marshall, you name it, that really have empowered tremendous leaders out there in history. But our philosophy up until 2008 was command and control, which essentially in any business or sports would be, in essence, micromanaging more than we should even approach doing today. And you could do it. You could look out and say, hey, go left, go right, do this, do that. The pace was such, what we consider the fog of war, and I would call it the fog of business, the fog of sports, it was not enough information, right? You just didn't have enough information to make a decision. And when I was younger, much younger, you could make a decision, have initiative, and nobody would second guess you, because you're getting 2 or 3 pieces of information. Who's going to second guess that? You're doing the best you can. Hey, great initiative. What happens now? What's the fog of war, the fog of business now? Too much information, right? Overwhelming amounts. How do you find in the, haystacks of information, how do you find those golden needles to make a decision that give you the key info in thousands of pieces of information? And if you make a decision today, what happens if you don't analyze that big data right and use things like artificial intelligence, other things, all you can to try to help you? You're second guess like crazy. Well, you knew this. Why didn't you use this? So it changes initiative quite a bit. So we switched in 2008 to a system, not command and control, but called Mission Command. And this is something that's really, Mission Command is all about empowerment, empowering subordinates as much as you possibly can. And to do that, we have, of course, the first thing you got to do is what I just was talking about, build trust. That's first. You've also got to explain a clear intent, a vision, where you're going, a clear intent that they can understand. Everybody wants that. And on the back of the card that talks about trust. It's got a whole thing on vision. And I would tell you that this is something, again, I see in many organizations. You can walk in, and it's military, sports, business, all over the place. You can see that they lack a vision, and people want a vision. They're kind of floundering. It's not what you do. Everybody knows what you do. The Cowboys, they play football. It's what you're for, what you stand for. And when you find a winning team, a winning organization, the best, they have a clear vision of what they stand for. So that's a key part of this mission command. And then you have to have a discussion on the mission command. This is probably the most important. How much risk is acceptable? And this is a difficult one. So you as the leader might think, here's where you have acceptable risk. The subordinate might think, here's acceptable risk. You've got to come together. You might go a little their way, they come a little your way. But if you're not having that discussion on acceptance of prudent risk, you will have unbelievable problems. And the biggest problem will be when there is failure, because there will always be failure, where does the buck stop? Right? Where does it stop in the organization when you empower? And that's the most difficult part of mission command. Where does the blame stop? If it goes all the way up and everybody responsible, all the way up to the general manager, all the way up to the chain of command, for our case, Secretary of Defense, if they're all relieved if there's a mistake, how much mission command do you think you'll have at the bottom, and how much empowerment? None. So obviously that discussion of risk is very important. And so we've adopted this, and it's the only way to keep up in this fast-paced world. We used to say we needed leaders who were comfortable in ambiguity and chaos about 10 years ago, comfortable in this change of how the world is changing. Well, comfort isn't good enough. Comfort isn't going to save lives in a disaster. Comfort isn't going to protect our nation when we need it. We need leaders who thrive in ambiguity and chaos, who thrive in that situation. And so that's leaders who, it has to be leaders who are empowered. If they're micromanaged, they can't do it. And empowered and trusted with the key discussions and points I talked about in Mission Command.
So, we talk about vision and what we stand for, and we can look at the U.S. military and say, well, it's easy to know what the U.S. military stands for. And then this idea of discussion, negotiating risk, and making sure it's the same level of acceptable risk across the team, I think that's really different. That dives in. Can you apply that? Now, take us through a case study. I know Pete Carroll, Coach Pete Carroll, sought your counsel.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, Sonia, and I'm glad you saw it. So when I was commanding a corps, about 80,000 soldiers up in Tacoma, Seattle area, Joint Base Lewis McChord, and we have a partnership, the Army does, with the NFL on traumatic brain injury, and working together to help prevent, we have the same challenges from operations and so forth. So Pete Carroll and I met and started talking about traumatic brain injury, and it led into leadership. And this is 2013. And what he was facing, we were talking about vision and some of these very same things, empowerment. So it's kind of interesting. And I explained to him how, it is, you would think sometimes it's very easy in the military, what we stand for, service, to a cause greater than self. We swear allegiance to the Constitution. So we're very lucky we have that. But within organizations, you still need that vision. That's a very broad, so you've got to develop that. So we have a thing we do, I've done from when I was in charge of 30 people up to 100,000. It's called a great teams exercise. And what's key about it is it gets buy-in, which is very, very important in this generation. I would say, again, my generation, we didn't care about, not that we didn't care about buy-in, we didn't expect it. And you just listen to the leadership. Now, if you don't have buy-in from the bottom of the organization up, they're not going to just take the vision. They're not going to run with this empowerment because it's not theirs. So as I was working with Pete Carroll, we were explaining this, talked to him. He said, hey, thanks, General Brown, that's great. I went back to my job. He went back to his job. That's the end of it. Good. We meet every now and then. They do great stuff for soldiers and families. It was fantastic. Well, he calls me up about 2 months later. This is the spring of 2013. He says, hey, General Brown, what was that you were talking about? We're having some problems. They had DUIs. They had all kinds of issues off the field. The team was having some major issues. So we went up and did this great teams exercise with them, and it was fascinating. Russell Wilson just impressed the heck out of me. I would take him as a leader any day of any size formation in the Army. An amazing leader, just talking leadership. So what it is, the coach, the leader, gives their vision, very short, what they think the team, their vision should be. Very short, one sentence, maybe two at the most. Then the players, and you do this again, when I was commanding 10,000, I got about 500 involved. You can't do it with everybody, but the key leaders you can do it with. So in this case, he had the key leaders within the team, and I think it was about 40 total involved, but about 20 that were really the key. And they take that vision, and then they go, and it takes about 6 hours, and they look at, well, what does that mean to us? And they're developing what it means to them. And one of them I remember, very similar to ones my soldiers had come up with. They said, hey, you're a Seahawk 24/7. Honor the legacy. That was one of and they developed what they called the Seahawk Creed. You can call it, a lot of things you can call it, but oftentimes a creed that you have, and it comes after in the military, we have, Ranger Creed, different creeds that we have that have been developed over time. So this came from the players. And it's really fascinating. The coaches, Coach Carroll got with me, and so here's a Seahawk Creed. And he said, you know what? If we had developed it, the coaches would have developed the exact same thing, but it's theirs. And there's incredible buy-in because it's theirs. It came from them, not the coaches. And that sustained them that season. He kept in touch with me, and he was asking, hey, how do I recognize someone who does this part of the creed? I'd say, they wear the gold jersey on Thursday or whatever, and recognize. You've got to recognize that creed developed. So, for example, in military formation, a military organization, when someone would demonstrate a part of the creed, we'd bring them up in front of 10,000, recognize them, give them an award, make it a huge deal, and you're reinforcing that behavior all the time. The creed's posted everywhere. It's in the locker room. It's everywhere. You're really reinforcing that behavior. So this took them through their ups and downs, and they when they won the Super Bowl, I got to speak to Coach Carroll and Russell Wilson. So they said, when they were at that down point, that creed is what brought them back. It was very interesting. Now, I'm still waiting on my Super Bowl ring. I'm confident it's lost in the mail somewhere, and eventually, no. But it was really fun doing that work, and we do that in the military, and it applies. And I would tell you the key for that is buy-in, which is expected. And so they had that buy-in from the bottom up. And again, the coaches could have done the same, developed the same thing, and it wouldn't have had the impact. Interestingly, when you look at some key leaders on that team, just following it from a distance later, were traded away, and they kind of lost that advantage they had, if you will. It's fascinating, and that's something, again, if the whole team is working together, everybody involved, maybe that wouldn't happen as, decisions made separately can be key on players and key leaders within your organization.
And an insight, just listening to you, is that with that creed, because of that buy-in, and it's a buy-in into a vision of what you stand for, it's a buy-in into a purpose, so there's an identity formation associated with that too, which is so powerful because we're driven by what we see ourselves as.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And, you take any team, again, in sports, business, any group, if they truly believe in what they're doing, they have buy-in, there's a great vision for that, or it's going to be unstoppable. And you can look at, some of the examples used throughout this, they've had that. That's why they're successful organizations. And then you can look at another organization that just doesn't quite have that total buy-in, or the whole, the trust is not there for whatever reason. And I'm not saying it's easy. But another example I'll use is Coach K with the Olympic team. And to me, that was fascinating because he contacted me. He wanted the first meeting when he first started coaching the Olympic team. So and many people said he couldn't do it. These NBA egos, and how are you going to get them to play for the country and sacrifice? It's all about money and all this other stuff. And quite honestly, I was a little bit, these are all egotistical, individuals, and how are you going to do that? And then Coach got a hold of me, and I said, look, they don't want to hear, at the time I was Colonel Brown, I said, they don't want to hear Colonel Brown, but how about I bring in some wounded warriors, amazing young men and women who have sacrificed, and we talk about selfless service. And one of them, for example, Scotty Smiley, West Point lieutenant, worked for me when I was a brigade commander in Iraq, and suicide bomber ignited, and he lost both his eyes. continued to serve another 12 years in the military blind. Command soldiers, went and got a master's, just amazing example leader. He was ESPN Sportsman of the Year award, from doing all the different things he'd done, climb mountains. So anyway, we brought him in the Wounded Warriors, and the very first meeting, and talked selfless service, what that really means to your country. And then we had wounded soldiers and then families of those who paid the ultimate price, and tragically we lost, who had written letters to the players, and they gave them a flag from the soldiers' uniform when they were deployed, and what basketball meant to them and the families and what it means. And I will tell you, it changed my attitude on the NBA players, seeing their reaction and then support of the Wounded Warriors. It was game-changing, and if you, in the Olympics, when the players would salute after a great play, they came up with that to honor the Wounded Warriors. And they, like Scotty Smiley, for example, the young man who lost his eyes, he wanted to go to Duke to get a master's in business. So I got a hold of Coach K, saying, hey, can you help Scotty? He said, hey, LeBron, 3 other, Dwayne Wade, they've already called me. I'm already working it. And every time they were anywhere in the area where Scotty was, they would get a hold of him, mic themselves up so they could talk to him, because he couldn't see, and they would, that type of support. But that's what he wanted to instill about selfless service. You're playing more than basketball. You're playing for your country, and that selfless service. So when you look, he's a master at building a team and understanding people. And so he was able to take these guys and form incredible teams. And that's, again, that vision and that ability to, they knew he cared to show and to bring that together, and then it's unstoppable. And pretty amazing. He did it 3 times. Talk about courage, because any one of those, if he'd have lost one game, they would have said he failed. So kind of admire that.
General Brown, thank you so much for all these various insights and stories. Let's connect the dots among this idea of courage with trust, empowerment, risk, and purpose. So a lot of times when we think about leadership, it's just the relationship between the leader and the follower, right? Yeah. However, when we talk about team, it's not only this relationship where you're in the center, but you're also connecting them to each other and building that trust.
Yeah.
So that lends to this idea of psychological security. I mean, research has shown that the biggest predictor of revenue growth is psychological security of your team. So how do you as a leader foster that? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. One of the challenges today I found that's gotten worse and worse, first of all, you have to, in that trust and building that learning environment, you have to accept failure, which sounds crazy, but I literally almost encourage failure. I'm not talking about anything illegal, immoral, or unethical, but somebody trying to do the right thing, in innovation, you want to fail, and you want to fail fast, and then you learn from it. But one of the challenges that's gotten worse and worse is this generation today, and I know I sound like an old fart when I'm saying that, but it is true. They are very afraid of failure, very afraid. And I really dug into why is that? Nobody likes failure, and I've failed plenty. And again, amazed I'm sitting here, but you learn from failure. And Winston Churchill says, that failure, success is failing over and over again and not losing your enthusiasm. You're going to fail to do anything, and so we know that. But this generation, as I look at it, and as you break it down, and we've talked a lot about it, how the world has changed. So when we used to fail when we were young, you could keep it fairly well isolated, family and close friends. Now failure goes everywhere. It's tweeted, it's text, it's blogged. In human nature, I wish it wasn't this way, but people thrive in that, and they spread the failure. I guess it makes them feel good. I'm not sure it's human nature. They definitely do. So this is a challenge you have when trying to encourage folks to innovate, building that team, and encourage new ideas when you're innovating, and they're going to fail. And so and I've had this happen. I was in combat, and I had a young captain in charge of about 180 soldiers in a tough situation. Mosul has been in the news, Mosul, Iraq. We're in Mosul, Iraq. And he was trying to do something, and it didn't work real well. And so a 3-star general calls me and says, hey, how could that happen, Brown? What the hell are you doing down there? And I was like, Sir, you remember the 12 really good things that happened over the last couple of weeks? Okay, if you make an example of this young captain for trying and failing and, doing his best, but nobody got hurt, it's all good, we'll never have, those 12 things will go away. You'll never have innovation. But at that level, they're kind of, so he understood that. I was very fortunate. He let us keep innovating and trying and learning from each other. And I knew we had it right when I had a huge area, the border of Syria, Iraq, Iran, northern Iraq there, and a huge area. And I was 7 hours away from one of my areas. I was with a young captain, and he was doing a pretty neat, innovative thing. And I said, well, where'd you learn that? He said, from Captain so-and-so in Mosul. I saw that we had a sharing online from the Foxhole, Rapid Adaptation Initiative, we called it. We'd rapidly share ideas and learn to save lives and do better, right there in the middle of the desert, in the middle of tough situations. But that was hard to get there.
Yeah.
And they have to, know that they're not going to be held, and it's not going to go everywhere, that failure is okay, and in fact encouraged in many cases. And so we would look to highlight, again, within the organization, the innovation awards, and some of those would be awards for failure, where they tried. But our best ideas came from those young soldiers, the closest to being in harm's way. And what's fascinating, in all your organizations, it's the exact same way. For us, the young soldier who's on the edge there, a young private, young sergeant, they're out in harm's way. They're going to innovate even if their leadership doesn't encourage it. If the leadership encourages it, it grows and it's really unstoppable. If the leadership doesn't, in our case, they're going to innovate anyway because their lives depend on it. It's life or death for them. And they're going to innovate to save their life. They're just not going to tell their leadership they did it. You have people in your organization like that. They feel their job depends on it. The organization depends on it. They're going to innovate and not necessarily tell. But if you capture them in your vision and your purpose, if you built that trust, they're going to share it and get rid of that human tendency. Sometimes also folks will innovate and they will want to hold on to the idea till everyone knows it's theirs. That's another kind of human nature. You want to hold on to it so everybody, so I get credit for it. And in the effective organizations, they share it. As soon as they know it's a good idea that works, they share it and they don't worry about who gets the credit. But reality, they get more credit for that. When you share, you get way more credit that you didn't hold on to it. You were sharing it. And so it works out incredibly well.
And that comes with celebrating both the successes, being mindful
Yeah.
that you're trusting that your people, because they're good, they want to succeed and they want to innovate. And the failure, we can always control the outcomes. And what can we learn
Well,
from that?
that's a key thing. I'm in the middle of pretty big innovation right now in the Pacific, just the way we deal with growing investment by China and Russia, and their missiles now outrange us and different things. So we're innovating how we adapt so that we can prevent a war, in essence. They wouldn't be crazy enough to go to war with us, and we never want that, so we're innovating. But what happens in innovation? Very few people on your side of the fence that say, this is a great idea right from the beginning. Very, very few. Most people are on the fence, waiting to see how that idea comes out. And then there's a whole bunch of people on the other side of the fence that are saying, that goes against the culture, goes against us. Are you kidding me? That's just stupid. So you really have to celebrate every small victory in innovation in a major way. The tendency might be, well, that was not that big a victory, let's move on. No, you've got to celebrate, and you get more people fall off the fence on your side. Then the failures, they're going to, the other side, see, I told you so, you're trying to, so you got to celebrate every small victory more than you could ever imagine. And eventually what happens, you all know what happens, if things work, everybody on the side of the fence was saying it wouldn't work, was saying they were part of the success. They immediately bowl right through the fence, and they were the key. Those on the fence that fell over, they know they were the key. But that's innovation. That's how it is. And you've got to change, again, in some cases, incredible bureaucracies and cultures. And so it's certainly not easy to do, but can be done. But again, it takes a lot of work, starting with, as we were talking at the very beginning, building that trust.
And those small moments, once again, right? And that becomes part of that trust. So this summit has always, for all the years I've been engaged in it, has always been about the audience. And so at this point, I would like to open it up to you for any questions you may have for General Brown.
Anything at all. Yeah, sure.
What is your position about this essence of leadership style that is right now in global leaders? This lack of sense of leadership in global leaders right now?
I'm sorry, lack of sense of.
These kinds of leaders that we have today, leading countries, leading organizations, that sometimes they have this emptiness about values and stuff like that. What's your take of that?
Yeah, well, again, I'm certainly no expert, wouldn't want to critique anybody, but I would just say leadership in general, if you don't have very set values that are reflected in your vision, it's going to be difficult to sustain that for a long period of time. And that affects many organizations today because of the way things are changing. And the example I would give you, a couple of years ago, we realized we had to develop an Army ethic. What ethical behavior, what the standard for ethical behavior is. And I talked to a lot of businesses about this in different forums. And why did we have to do that? Well, you know, it used to be years ago, ethical behavior, you could say, you behave ethically, and people kind of knew pretty much what that meant. Well, we'd have young leaders that just coming into service that thought it was okay that while they're with their soldiers, while they're at work, they could be ethical. They could go home and do unethical things on the internet. A connectivity that was never there before, where you can do things where you're in the privacy of your own home, and you can do things that before would require you to go out in society and do something and somebody may see you. Well, things have changed, and you look at this. So, what is ethical was in question. What is ethics to you and me now has changed. So we spent a lot of time, an entire year, working an Army ethic. And it was interesting because we did this and we got senior military leaders, junior leaders, civilians, retirees. And one of our retired 4-stars, Freddie Franks, an amazing leader from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Vietnam, lost his leg. He's an incredible leader. After we got it where we thought it was just perfect, he said, you're missing the spirit of the organization. It's technically correct, but it doesn't hold the whole spirit of the organization. What we stand for, what we do has got to be woven throughout the ethic as well. So I just bring that up because I think that is something that every team anywhere is wrestling with. And my take, if you have leaders that don't address that in their organization, what are the fundamentals we stand for? What's our purpose? What are we for, not what we do? It's not going to be long-term and lasting. And I'm sure you can probably point out a bunch of folks that are billionaires that didn't do that. That's fine, but I'm talking about, a team you'd want to work on, you'd want your son or daughter working on. It's not going to work if that's not there. And we realized that and had to and put out this Army ethic, Army-wide. What are the values and standards? We had the Army values, but what are those ethical limits so that you can really get the vision of selfless service as much as possible. Hope that answers your question. Yep, sure. Oh, go ahead. That's right.
I'll make it quick. So, Jeremy, what are your thoughts on if you have a member of your team who you simply can't win over, you can't get him or her to think the same way as you, have the same values?
Great question. I call it the rule of thirds. In any organization, there's a third of the organization that is with you from the minute you get there. They love you. You can do no wrong. There's a third of the organization. It's still figuring out the new boss, the new leader, the new system that changes. They could go your way. They could go the other. There's the other third, the bottom third, that is loyal to the last leader, is loyal for whatever reason. They just don't. So, and it's in just about every organization. Now, the really effective, tremendous teams get all thirds working together. And but what you find most of the time, obviously people work the top third because that's everybody that loves them, and they work the middle third, but they ignore the bottom third, figuring they're hopeless. And often what I found is they're not hopeless. They just need someone to explain. It can be simple little things. I'll give you an example. I was commanding in Europe, NATO, and I used to just go and pop in different locations. I was a 2-star general, and I would just go pop in different locations without letting folks know I was coming, kind of leadership by wandering. And so I showed up in the staff section, the logisticians, the back of this building in the headquarters, and just went around, hey, what are you doing? How's it going? Do you understand? You know, just talking to them. And, you know, of course, they're all surprised. There you are. So I didn't think too much of that. But those are the type of little things, you know, getting out of your office, getting out there, seeing stuff. 2 years later, several of the individuals that were in that section happened to run into, they were at a course that I was talking at, and they raised their hands and they said, you know, we remember when you came to our section, no general had ever come there, no leader had really ever come. And then you asked us, you showed you cared, you asked us. They were a third that was not on the team. They were now on the team. So, you know, you've got to look at the rule of thirds and don't fool yourself. That's why San Yin is brilliant with 360 eval, because a lot of people will think they're doing tremendous because that top third and everything's wonderful in the organization. But when you do a 360, you get the bottom third if you do it right. And you realize some things you're saying may not be transmitting down the line quite the way you intended. And you can really get after those things, and small things will make the difference. If you have someone that just does not get on board, it's time for them to go somewhere else. But I've rarely had to do that. Very rare. You had a question over here? Yeah. Same question. Okay, that's amazing. Yeah, okay.
First of all, thank you for your service, General Brown.
Oh, it's my honor, yeah.
When you look back through history at some of the great generals throughout history, is there, you know, one or two that you go, you know, that's somebody I learned a lot from, whether I met him personally or researched, and maybe what's the one or two things?
Yeah, no, a great question. And we've been very blessed as a nation to have amazing leaders, and I've been very blessed to work for tremendous leaders that mentored and allowed me to be innovative and use mission command and stuff. But I think when you look at those leaders, and I'm really glad you asked this, because I think this is a key point we're seeing today, they had a great balance of the art and science of leadership. You know, leadership is an art and a science. And I see today there's a lot of movement towards the science, you know, data. And you even see coaches, you know, with their card, you know, and okay, the data says, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I think there's a place for that. It's a balance, but it's a balance. I can't imagine Vince Lombardi with a thing that tells him, you know, what about the leaders, the art, the instinct is key. When I was preparing to command at a level, lieutenant colonel, battalion command, they call about 1,000 soldiers, I had the chance to ask some of our great leaders, and when you said, who are the great generals, Colin Powell, I would put as one of those. And I had the good fortune to be able to ask him about what advice would you give someone going to command, and he said, go with your instincts. And about 10 other generals I asked said the same thing, leaders, go with your instincts. And there's an art and a science. When I was in combat with 12,000 soldiers, I kind of kept track in a year. I made 63 instinctive decisions. I let the staff talk me out of 2, you know, that they talked me out of. Fortunately, nobody was hurt and everything, but a couple of those saved a lot of lives. But as I looked at that, it was hard. When making an instinctive decision in training was not that hard, but making that decision based on instinct when lives are at stake was difficult. But it's the old Malcolm Gladwell blink, you know before, and the old, experience does count, 10,000 hours, et cetera. So those great generals like Colin Powell had tremendous instincts, tremendous skills of the balance of the art and science. Of course, you'd have to put probably the general that is most admired by military leaders is Marshall, George Marshall. Despite the fact he went to VMI. I have one of my aides, Blake Lackey, went to VMI. That's his only fault, was going to VMI, not West Point. I'm only kidding, that's a joke there. But he's an amazing leader. And if you read about, I would recommend reading about Marshall. He could have had Eisenhower's job. By the way, he was tremendous, that art and science and talent. Eisenhower was a colonel when Marshall first worked with him when he was the chief of staff of the Army as a 4-star general. And he saw the vision of later Eisenhower would be Supreme Allied Commander, future president, but he saw that potential and helped develop him. He could have had that job, but he knew Eisenhower was a better team builder. He knew he had to stay in Washington and build an 8 million soldier army to win this. And he knew, although it was a crappy job, he had to stay at that one. Pretty amazingly selfless leader, would later be Secretary of State, et cetera. But so he's, I would say, one that I would read about: selfless service and ability to form a team, and that art and science balance. Colin Powell certainly another one. Eisenhower's another. There's a whole bunch, and there's modern day folks same. So, but good question. Thanks.
Yeah, Sam, I think we got time for one more.
General, thank you. This has been riveting. You talked about encouraging or encouraging failure.
Yeah.
What kind of dialogue do you use with your team when they do fail? And then, since we're all human and make mistakes, when you as a leader have missteps, how do you communicate that to your team?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sonia and I were talking about this earlier. So I've had 3 or 4 times in my 38 years where I thought it was over for a mistake that happened, where I was in charge, and literally as a captain it happened. I almost was relieved. As a lieutenant colonel, I was almost relieved. As a 1-star general, almost relieved, and career over, done. Very unpleasant experiences, I can assure you. I love what I'm doing. I love soldiers. I love people, and I love that aspect. But these were very unpleasant situations. And like any organization, when you have failure, it's like you've got a disease, and you really find out who your true friends are. At those times, and you find out what matters. Like my family was always there. My wife of 38 years, it's just amazing. So it helps you. But I don't think you can be a truly effective leader if you haven't experienced that type failure. So I actually talk about it, the dark side of command, and I'm one of the few that does. And I was just telling Sonia, and I don't like it, quite honestly. It's sometimes embarrassing, and I'd rather tell them a few of the good things I've done. But every time I say I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to talk about the failure, I'll have a lieutenant colonel, somebody come up to me and say, "Hey, sir, I just wanted to thank you. I had this happen when I was in command, and because you talked about it, I was able to handle it this way." And so then I'm kind of like, yeah, damn, now I got to keep talking about it, You can't get away from it. So I think you've got to talk to your team about failure. And it's not something that's out there. And it's really hard with this generation, as I said, because they see it as, I've talked to a bunch about, and that, again, I'm not talking about, we always make the distinction, not that it's acceptable, anything illegal, immoral. No, that's not acceptable. But if they're trying to do the right thing and they fail, and then you've got to back them. So I tell them about how, I stood in, 2-star general, I'm a lieutenant colonel, and I walked in the office, and it was about whether a captain should keep his job or not for the mistake he made, which was trying to do the right thing, and it didn't go right. And so I walked in and I told the general, "Fire me, don't fire Captain so-and-so." Now this is 16 years I'd served. I loved what I was doing. I was in command all of 2 weeks, waited 16 years to do this job. I loved it. And in my mind, I said, that's not a hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do. And he could have said, "Okay, Brown, you're out." And so you've got to make that commitment. You got to, and never had to say a word to that captain or anybody in the organization. They know it when you stand up for them like that. And so you got to talk about failure. You got to back them when they fail, and sometimes it's not easy. But when you failed yourself, you have that, you look in the mirror, and it's not about rank. It's not about, it's about being true to yourself, doing the right thing. And so, I would not want to get rank or promotion by being, at the expense of my subordinates or being a kiss ass, whatever. That's just not, you're not going to go there. And so that makes it much easier, those tough decisions. And the organization knows it. They will see that. You never have to, I go back to when I was a young captain, and I remember we were doing an exercise in Germany. And so this one captain, he told his guys, there's a town, German town, and you're out in the field for 45 days doing drill, there's all the exercises back in those days, Cold War against the Soviet threat. And this captain told his company, 180, you will not go in the town, you will go nowhere near the town. And I told my team, I trust you. You go in there in groups, behave right, do this. So they're going into the local Metzger meat market, you know, people in the village are bringing them meals. Meanwhile, this group that he told not to go in, they snuck in and got wildly drunk in a bar, and he was relieved of command, you know, removed. And you look, and he had yelled at his guys for things that went wrong, and they knew he didn't care about them. You build the trust, they know you care, they're going to do the right thing in the organization. And so you know, it's kind of interesting. It's that level makes a huge difference.
Any other questions?
People have planes to catch and everything else,
okay.
I understand. Really appreciate you staying. I would offer to you, since you stayed, not a free trip to Hawaii, but if you get out to Hawaii sometime in the next 4 or 5 months, just look me up and I'll get you on a special tour of Pearl Harbor, a special beach on the North Shore where you can go and see sea turtles. Sonia was just out there with her kids. And monk seals and all this kind of stuff. You know, that's the least I could do because you stayed. And so many other people said, forget it, it's the last one, they're out of here. So I'll square you away in Hawaii if you come out that way. But I'm out of there 1 October, so you got to hurry. If you're going to come out there, just look me up.
So thank you so much, General Brown. And just this is great.
That was fantastic. So if you want to go to the Baylor Sports Performance Center, take a tour, do some of the player eval, if you see in the back here, very lovely lady, Chelsea Smith, raise her hand, check in with her, and then you can set up a time or go direct or change, whatever. Outside of that, thank you all so much for taking part in the summit. I'll be in touch moving forward. And just another round of applause for all of our speakers who've been out here today. Thank you so much.